the back, but who knows? But anyway, he
I
was a
can't believe
character.
that.
He ended up in the bush once with it, he told us, because he didn't have the brakes working.
So thank you everyone for coming on. We have, in my opinion, a very exciting panelist tonight. Bill Wilson from the Prairie Farm Report's on. So I'm just going to quickly go through kind of the rules of the webinar tonight as per usual. So we're giving away 2 prizes for best questions. So that includes a Tough Duck Covers and Co jacket and a hat. So put your questions in the Q&A, not the chat. Q&A, not the chat. And as I'm interviewing Bill and we're going through some inventions, I'll try and keep on top of questions in the chat. And as well, I got Trav to my right, as per usual, who the real hero behind the webinar that nobody sees, is going to be filtering through some questions as well. So make sure you get your questions in the Q&A and the chat. So if you got anything you want to ask Bill, how we're setting up this interview this evening. So a couple different ways. So we kind of went back and forth internally, and I had a nice conversation with Bill and his wife, Helen, who's not going to be on tonight. We tried, but she said, no way, Jose. She's watching from the other room. So we thought about talking about Bill's favorite inventions, which we are going to chat about tonight. But kind of my bias and our bias here at Covers & Co. is, and hopefully for you guys watching, is kind of the business idea and the structure behind Prairie Farm Report. So everyone that's on tonight, it was such an influential part of either childhood or growing up, or even farming as an adult. Some of the new ideas and hearing from farms that think a little differently and have a bit of a creative mind and some skill set to put behind an invention. So yeah, so kind of what we want to do this evening isn't necessarily talking about specific inventions, but more the idea and the concept behind the show, how long it ran, the people that they were interviewing, and just kind of understanding more about what Prairie Farm Report was, what it meant to the people that were involved, and kind of the nuts and bolts of what went on, through the show's peak popularity. So, Bill, if you'd unmute yourself, whoops, and turn your screen on, whoops. Well, Bill Wilson, welcome to the Covers & Co webinar. We appreciate having you on here. Like I say, we chatted on the phone. I sent you some questions just so you had a little bit of time to prepare as far as what we were doing, but we got good attendance again tonight with the webinar, and obviously these people are big fans, so hoping to get as many crowdsourced questions in as possible. So maybe we'll just start, Bill, with a little bit of an intro to yourself. So like I told you on the phone, the first syllable out of your mouth, I did not need an introduction. I knew exactly who I was talking to. Maybe just talk a little bit about, I guess, kind of what you're up to now, and then we're going to rewind all the way back and talk about kind of where you grew up, where you're from, and what did Prairie Farm Report, or kind of your career in life, look like in the early days?
Well, do you want me to wind back right now?
Let's wind back now, and then we'll
okay,
get
sure.
We'll
do
get
it in that order.
Yeah,
before I forget.
Yeah, that's fair.
But yeah, no, thank you very much, first of all, for welcoming me into your webinar and your group of fine growers across Western Canada, I guess, maybe even other parts of Canada or the world for that matter.
We're not as widely viewed as Prairie Farm Report yet.
Yet, okay.
But we're hoping to get there someday.
Well, yeah, it can happen, trust me. But yeah, no, it all started with me. Actually, I started out in radio years and years ago. Probably about 50 years ago, this very month almost, in a small town of Weyburn, Saskatchewan, is where my first radio job was, and that was not right out of high school, but I think a couple of years out.
So, Bill, did you grew up on a farm?
Yeah, we farmed a mixed farm northwest of Moose Jaw, in the well, Tuxford, Marquis area, south of that and east of Tuxford. We grew mostly in those days flax, wheat, barley, oats. Hadn't gotten much into canola yet because it didn't really exist in those years, and that part of all the canola was sort of relegated to north of the Yellowhead in Saskatchewan. And so yeah, we farmed and also had always had anywhere from 60 to 100 brood cows kicking around. So we had pasture land down on the lighter soils down towards Mortlack. Our farm was up on what's known as the Regina Plains, so it was better suited for growing cereals and oil seeds. And so did that for a few years actually out of school, but then decided that I wanted to pursue radio. I was really interested in radio, but I hadn't even thought about television in those years, again, 73, 74. And then eventually worked for other stations in southern Saskatchewan, ending up at CKRM here in Regina, doing agricultural reporting. By this time, it was the late 70s, and was then offered a position with CBC TV, which I applied for a job. It was kind of a long shot thing because they usually promote a lot from within, but I was fortunate to get on with them because they did have an agriculture and resource uh, section or department within the corporation back in those days, and so they were pretty keen on doing programming directed at both consumers but also the farm audience. So I worked there, and that's where I learned television for in a fairly intensive crash course almost in terms of learning it on the job. And I spent 2 or 3 years there working for them, and really with some real professionals in the video and scripting area. It was right when they were transitioning from film, which was the main way to get things on TV back in the 70s, into videotape. It was right in that transition period. So fortunately, that helped me then when I left to establish AgCom Productions in 1983, which is when
So
Helen and I.
before we
Yep.
talk about
Yep.
maybe AgCom Productions, what was your role at CBC at the time? Like, were
Well,
you
at CBC, I was actually I was their agricultural specialist, I guess you'd call me, on the uh, for the dinner hour news show of 24 hours, it was called in those days. And I also did some, believe it or not, within a year or so of working with them, I did some national stuff for them. Uh, it was great during the Crow rate railway debate, the subsidized rate that producers used to get for hauling grain. And we made some trips to Ottawa doing interviews and things like that for even appeared once on the show, the Journal, it was called, after the CBC National with Barbara Frum. It did an interview with them one night, and so it was quite a ride, doing a lot of pretty serious ag policy journalism, I guess you'd call it, not the sort of nuts and bolts and entrepreneurship agriculture that we eventually segued into, because that was one of the reasons I left. I didn't get canned or laid off at CBC. I could have probably stayed with them, but I I saw a need for programming to talk directly to the producer, sort of in his and her language, and talk about innovations and things as such, not so much about policy, because as I found out covering ag policy for 10 years in radio and at CBC, uh, it doesn't really change that much. It's a political thing. Politicians come and go. The bureaucrats essentially, run the show, if you will. And I mean, there are different programs that come and go, but it really isn't as uh, the producer I found just didn't have a lot of interest in that, and it was somewhat boring because it was so much policy gobbledygook political talk, which again farmers and ranchers, once you get to know them, they don't want to hear that. They want to cut through that and get to the real issue on the ground at the particular time.
I find the more I know about politics, I understand why they call it political theater.
Yeah,
It seems like that's all it is.
yeah, it's pretty predictable from year to year. The policies, of course, they can vary widely, and they do quite often. There can be some dramatic changes that can, change the landscape of how agriculture is undertaken, and we're sort of in the throes of that right now with the movement towards the zero emissions movement and all the rest of it, and how that's going to impact ag, and it probably will at the end of the day. But and so it's going to be gradual, but it's still going to be significant for a lot of producers, and already is with some increased costs.
So maybe Bill, talk about the switch. So you were working at CBC, and then you decided to go the entrepreneur route. So like, what was the idea behind AgCom Productions? And I guess more to the point, I guess directed to our conversation piece tonight, was Prairie Farm Report something that was an idea right off the start, or what was the initial concept behind the idea of the show?
Well, it depended on a couple of things. It depended on, I wanted to speak directly to an agricultural audience and have, total editorial control over what we put on. And so first of all, you need to have finances to do it. And in those days, you had to go, knocking on doors. There weren't any real government programs that could help you out very much at all. And so that's what I did. I spent actually I guess it was my holiday time at CBC, my vacation or leave days. I started traveling, rubber tiring at around Western Canada to TV stations ranging from Winnipeg to the east to Calgary in the west, and Dawson Creek up in BC.
And Bill, what was the pitch?
Well, the pitch was we're going to do this TV show, and we're calling it Prairie Farm Report, so everybody understood the name, didn't have to do any great explanation there, and because it spoke of the prairies, and everybody knew that generally meant the three prairie provinces with a little bit up in BC there in the Peace, and so that was and most of the program people that I dealt with in those days, because back then it wasn't big national corporations that owned these stations. They were all pretty much locally or at least regionally owned here in the West. And so you could talk to, the guys and gals that made the decisions as to what went on the air in terms of any programming they could put into place that was outside of their network commitments. And so I was able to talk to those people directly, whether it was in Prince Albert and even Swift Current in those days, or Regina, Saskatoon, or Lloydminster, or Red Deer, Calgary, Edmonton, Brandon, Winnipeg. I met with all these people across their desk, and I didn't find anyone who thought it was a bad idea. The big city guys, especially Calgary, they sort of felt initially that they were maybe too big for that kind of stuff, but then I said, look, you're the home of the Stampede. Now, come on. You're Cowtown, aren't you?
What
Sure, you got 500,000 people, but you're still Cowtown. That made them think a little bit.
What does a pitch in 1983? I assume you didn't have a show to like show anyone at this point.
No, I never had a demo reel or anything. No.
What does a pitch look like?
Some typewritten pages is what it was, basically. No fancy brochures, no nothing.
So what was the deal? Like you were looking for an advance from these shows, or like they would agree if you come up with a product, they would agree to have you on, and then you like take that to a bank?
Well, it's essentially, in those days it was barter programming. They would give us some advertising time to use in that program for our sponsors, and then of course they'd have their own sponsors, which are, a lot of those stations in those days, and even some to this day, they have, people that are very interested in advertising on television in their markets, and so it becomes a bit of a, it became, and it was immediately for, especially the Saskatchewan stations in particular, it became a real sales tool because they could, here was another just about full half hour of potential well, it was a half hour program, but they'd have potential to sell advertising in that. And so that meant something to those folks. And so that's what, there was some incentive on them to go in that direction as well. Again, the big city ones like Winnipeg and Calgary, it wasn't as big a deal, but it still was a deal for them even back then. And I did find it, believe it or not, Edmonton, the CFRN, which is now the CTV station there, was a CTV station, it always was, I guess. They were always keen on it because they sort of, even though they're in the big city of Edmonton, they really knew that outside of oil, agriculture was their bread and butter and still is. And
so this is 1983. What year was like AgCom founded? And was the idea just to go with one show off the start? And maybe talk about, okay, so you got people interested in the show. I mean, now the fun begins, right? Like now you actually have to produce a show.
Well, first of all, I got to find some money. And so namely some sponsorship funds. And so, yeah, I approached at the time, the big advertisers in agriculture were mostly the agriculture crop protection people. At the time, Monsanto and Herbst and some of the other companies, and I was able to fortunately have Herbst Canada, which was based right here in Regina. They have a plant here where they formulated their product. The big product in those days was a chemical called whole grass that they advertised a lot of, and so they were quite excited to advertise in a television show that they knew they were going to get a motivated audience, not like buying time in Dallas TV show or whatever that was the big TV show of the day, and pay exorbitant advertising rates in prime time, and spend a fortune and maybe not get the audience they really want to get to. And so they were keen right from day one, and so we pursued it from there, and so we produced, I think that was in the spring summer of 83, and by January 84 we were running our first show. We ran, I think, 14 shows that season.
In like 9 months later.
Yeah, basically, yeah. January we started and ran basically the first quarter of the year, and everybody seemed to, it was a whole new experience for us and everybody else, but the stations seemed to find it worked okay for them, and we didn't, we moved on from there.
So when you say us, who was the team?
At that time it was Helen and I, and she's still my full-time business partner and partner in life. And at that time, I had we just had one child, a young little girl that was just a year or two old, and so that was us in our basement in South Regina is where we operated things out of.
That had to be stressful.
Oh yeah, it was a real panic, I'll tell you. Well, first of all, we concluded that we had to have some way of feedback, so we launched the farm trivia contest, which we went around and got huge, beautiful prizes from John Deere and Yamaha in terms of well, it wasn't a quad in those days, it was a trike. But anyway, we got some great prizes to get feedback and give away hats, of course. And gosh, that was the best thing we ever did in terms of hearing directly from our audience, because immediately we'd have this contest every week and we'd ask a question about something that was on in the show. Was it a John Deere combine Joe so-and-so was driving, or a international or whatever? And man, there were some weeks we got over 1,000 entries.
So how do you enter?
It was snail mail.
So
Yeah, I mean, you filled out a postcard, or there was families that you know, they'd rip the top off a cornflakes box and send it in and write on it and put a stamp on it. Yeah, I don't know what postage was, but it was pretty reasonable. And so
So,
like I say, our fourth or fifth show, and we found out all of a sudden that invention shows. I think that first season we just did 2 out of the 14 were sort of invention shows, and we found that that just hit a spot with farmers that was overwhelming, and they responded by entering the contest like crazy.
so
And
that is one of my questions was like in the early days, because like I mean, you can have an idea for a show, but I bet after 1 year, it's changed just based on what your audience is telling you. But
well, you know,
how in 1983 do you get customer feedback? It was the trivia was the only way.
that was basically it. You know, I mean, we take a phone call and stuff, but it was before there was emails or anything, and so it was yeah, and people would even the first couple 3 years, you know, not too many would send in an idea, but it began to pick up after that. They realized that you know, they'd see an invention on the show and they'd say, well, you know, Jim down the road built one like that, but I think it's even better. So we'll let these guys know about it. And so next thing you know, we'd be getting feedback that way. But yeah, it was a great way to find out to learn more about your audience. That's for sure.
So at what point, uh, like at a year in, or like when you guys kind of switch the focus from general farm, I guess, information to uh, uh, inventions, did you think you were onto something at that point? Like that
Well, no,
was an
yeah,
inflection
we
point?
felt that yeah, because we'd hear from people and they'd say, you know, they'd say either that invention is like crazy or an old heck. The guys, you know, must have something wrong with them to build something like that. But then we get 4 phone calls on Monday. Yeah, I want to talk to him because I want to make one just like it, you know. And so then we
Yes.
realized that there's no real you know, set pattern for what is good and what is bad in terms of an invention. It's sort of a you know, what's good to one guy isn't it helpful to the next one. And so we suddenly that opened our eyes pretty big. And so sometimes you do some that you think, geez, I don't know if that was worth wasting 3 or 4 hours on. And then you'd find out that, boy, this guy has really got an idea. And so,
So maybe I'm very curious about the early days because I'm biased.
mm,
I help manage a startup company myself.
yeah,
In the early days, like what, because you had a young family as well, were
yeah.
you cameraman, interviewer, advertising manager, TV station relationship manager? Were you
Well,
all those things?
a good portion of them, I generally always counted on a good videographer, whether it was a freelance person that I would hire or a group of people right from a company. So in the early days, of course, we didn't have the resources to have those people on staff. And so I did get good videographers, and I think that was a key to our early success. Is that you know, I had a mind's eye, I guess, as to what it should look like, but I still wasn't technically terribly good at you know, operating cameras in those days and in the early days, and so it was really helpful to have those kinds of folks, and similarly on the editing side as well. And so we relied on that for the first couple of years. I think it was by 1985 we acquired our uh, our first equipment in terms of cameras, field shooting equipment, and uh, and editing equipment. So our first, I think, 2 seasons we, you know, relied on outside firms to we'd hire their crew or whatever and do shooting that way. Or we had our own person, but quite often we'd rent cameras, or we would buy our own cameras, our own camera. Again, the technology was right at a point where it was advancing into well, it was in videotape, but it was sort of transitioning from what was known as 3/4 inch tape, which is the field tape you would use, to a 1/2 inch tape called Betacam. And so that transition was happening just when we were starting. And so it was good in a way because we were able to get the latest technology when we went out and purchased our own equipment. And so had it been a few years earlier, we would have had to transition sooner as well. So uh, the timing was good there from a technology standpoint.
And I mean, speaking of technology, even when you're buying equipment in 1985, wasn't that stuff just crazy expensive?
It was, yeah. Like, I mean, you could easily spend, $50,000 on a broadcast camera, and you could spend 60 or 70,000 on a Betacam VTR, and you'd have to buy three of those to run an edit suite. So yeah, it was very costly, and so it was pretty capital intensive, but we were able to make it all work with again our sponsors and we also at the same time were transitioning into video was become a big marketing tool for companies, and so we were able to quite often do promotional and corporate videos for agricultural manufacturers and agricultural companies that wanted to reach the farm market, and so that was we found that out really early, like by 85 or so, we were producing stuff in that area as well. And then we eventually transitioned into some other programming later into the 80s besides the Prairie Farm Report.
So, well, maybe before we get there, like how quick was the growth from startup to, I mean, it sounds like by like the late 80s, like you're producing other shows, you're doing production commercials, like obviously you're still editing. I'm assuming because you guys were growing, like your viewership on Prairie Farm Report was skyrocketing, and I mean there would have been advertiser relationships to manage and to, I mean, go and try and mine and get new ones. I'm presuming. So like what
Yeah,
operation like
although
5 years in?
oh, yeah, that's true. There was always that and the Herxt at the time before it well it's transitioned into other companies since then, but they became quite uh, shall we say possessive. They wanted to make sure they had their inventory tied up, which is fine with me because that's just one phone call.
Yeah.
And or one visit, and so I was quite happy about that. And but then we had other folks knocking on the door, like CN Rail was quite interested in us, and so we ended up doing a series of television vignettes, we called them, called the Farm Management Advisor, that was syndicated for gosh, I don't know, 4 or 5 years across the West. I don't think those actually started till the early 90s, but some may have started in the late 80s. I'm not sure what the start date on that. But anyway, we were able to, for these other guys that wanted to get on TV, we certainly were eager to cook up programming for them. And in fact, we even got into the sports field for, I think it was 3 seasons. We did a show called the Canadian Curling Report, and it was
No way.
sponsored by BASF at the time. And again, they were big into the farmer's bond spiel and all that kind of stuff. And so we obliged and said, well, we can do some sports. I was a curler, and so it really worked out good that way.
So what, like I assume the need for the new shows was kind of a byproduct of you had people fighting over your advertising slots. So
Well, I
you know,
guess yeah, you can only give them so much inventory,
for
and
sure.
so you had to and again they had their own ideas quite often. They're people, and so and they maybe didn't want to do long term stuff, or they just want to do short term things, but it fit it fit the bill for them, and it worked for us, and so yeah, that was yeah, and as a result, through the late 80s, and then by 1989, we then moved out of rented space that we had in a commercial park here east of Regina and built our own facility, a 10,000 square foot facility, which I'm sitting in today, that we moved into in 1990. And so, yeah, that was things were happening very quick.
Sorry, Bill, can you see that? This is the building you're talking about?
That is indeed, yeah, that's our our headquarters, if you will, and production facility. Uh,
So when
Yep.
you guys built this building, I guess, how big was the team? What was your role?
Well, at that time, we were, like I say, doing more than just PFR. We were doing other programming and corporate videos and commercials and things as such. So we had upwards of about a dozen folks employed with us, pretty much on a full-time basis. Some were casual, some were contract, and so that was, yeah, and over the years, we never had that many working on PFR. It was always a pretty small group of maybe 3, 4 of us all together that would work on it in terms of shooting and writing and editing. But again, you add another show, you have to add more people. So yeah, that's what we got us into this facility for sure.
So we got our first question from the chat, Bill, but I had it down too. And I'm going to add to great question, put your Q&A. But I'm wondering about what it was like. You touched on a little bit about the early shows of Prairie Farm Report. Like, how did you come up with ideas? I mean, I guess that you thought were going to resonate with your audience. Like, what was kind of the concept in the early days? And then as you figured out later on which shows were most popular, how did you find these farms? Like, were you actively having somebody that was going out and, to ag shows or whatever, looking for producers, or were they just at a certain point, they were just coming into you?
Well, I think that the idea of innovation really struck a chord with us, and it obviously struck a chord with the viewer. And so we started out just looking at, inventions, machines that, whether it be a better opener for direct seeding into standing stubble or, some of those things that were very field related. And then all of a sudden, we realized that the livestock sector has a whole group of innovators, building better head gates or crowding facilities or crowding tubs. And so then we sort of broke it off into sections. We do inventions, hardcore inventions, if you will, on the oilseed grain farmer side. We do cattle handling facilities, or cattle handling as we call the theme, but it would relate to anything to do with cattle handling, whether it was a building, again, a series of corrals, a head gate, tilt tables, whatever. And then we had another theme we worked under. We sort of bounced into it by accident, and we realized that there's another sector called feed handling. And so there's all kinds of innovations with guys that build things to make the making of hay and the handling of feed, handling of both grains and supplements, and in fact, the bales for that matter. So we set a series of shows aside for feed handling. And so those were sort of the 3 or so main sections of inventions. And so that was what we really focused on. But then we started to look at lifestyle too, because, I don't know, shops is sort of it covers a lot of areas, and we were sort of known for doing shop shows, and we profiled dozens and dozens of shops over the years of various shapes and sizes. And that became a really popular item because farmers were always looking to build a better shop. And so if they could get one idea out of our show, they were, well pleased. And when we got later into the video game, originally with VHS tapes and then eventually with DVDs, we found that those we'd have guys call us and they'd say, look, we're pouring tomorrow at 2:00. I want to see that tape. Can you get it here on the courier overnight by 10:00 delivery? I said, well, we can try, but we can't speak for the courier, but we'll try, and they pay, an extra $40 if they had to get that $20 tape and to get some ideas about how to put in the in-floor heating system or whatever the case might be. And so that really became a popular item, and so we just kept looking for those kinds of shops and the innovations in them.
Yeah.
And then we decided to go into the lighter side of things a little bit for for maybe other members of the household, namely quite often the ladies, and that was, you know, farmyard design and maintenance. Although a lot of the farmers are really interested in that, the active farmer as well in the household. But that became very popular and very kind of fun to do because it was sort of, you know, it wasn't as technical, and it was you'd always be visiting a yard when it looked the prettiest, and so it was kind of a nice one. And then the other theme we worked on was, in terms of lifestyle, was machinery of the past. You know, it became really popular and still is to this day. People refurbishing old tractors, combines, you name it, and just no end of individuals that you know, we end up getting calls. We still get calls to this day. You know, I have a, you know, a 1949 you know, Alice Chalmers G for, you know, somebody might be interested. What do you think it'd be worth? You know, it's
Yeah.
all this kind of stuff. So we still get that to this day. And so again, that seemed to be a really uh, intriguing program for both, not just the old timer who had worked with the equipment, which was kind of neat because a lot of them did grow up on it, but you found a new generation of farmers that really got a kick out of working on those machines because, again, they were pretty simple to work on compared to today's machinery, which is all driven by a computer essentially. So it makes it a little more fun that way.
Or frustrating. One of the
Well, yeah, today you mean.
oh yeah,
Well,
today,
maybe back
yeah.
then too.
So
We
I
should,
got I do want to ask about kind of logistics behind the show. So now, like, we're through the first 10 years, and I mean, you guys are hitting a stride. What did production look like? How many episodes a year were you making? Like, when you sat down in a production meeting, what did you have, a list of farms, and we gotta organize the dates that it can work. It can't be raining. You know, the sprayers have to be you know, we want them in the field when you know, what did it look like as far as organizing that? Because that just sounds chaotic.
it was chaotic and often uh, crazy chaotic. And the what we would do, we'd always try to. We did actually in the early years do quite a bit of flying, believe it or not. We flew. It was kind of nice being in Regina because we were sort of central to the prairies, and we'd often fly even to Winnipeg, even though it's not that far. But certainly Calgary and Edmonton, we'd always fly there. Did that quite a bit from, gosh, the very start through to, you know, about 2000 or into the 90s, I'd say. And then it just became just too awkward with the equipment and airlines and the cost of travel. Again, you could book things pretty reasonable. You can make a deal. You make a side deal with Air Canada back in those days as a company where you could get a pretty good rate, and you wouldn't have to. You could phone them like the night before to book your tickets, and it was kind of cool.
Yeah.
But it was then, not now. And so I wish it was like that now. We then realized that we also realized too that we are sort of hitting some dead zones. If you'd go to those big cities, then you'd work in those areas. But then you realize that, geez, there's a lot of farming near the borders of Saskatchewan on each side. And so we were kind of, you know, it's just about as quick to jump in a truck and drive from here to Maple Creek as it is to, you know, it wouldn't be feasible to do it the other way around, but or even to Medicine Hat for that matter, or whatever town you're going to. So yeah, we then ended up rubber tiring it all over. And so, but that too gave us more flexibility because then we could group, you know, things together. We, you know, knew we were going into, say, southeast Saskatchewan for maybe even a couple of days. We might overnight in Estevan and do stuff down there, and maybe get as many as 4 or 5 things shot. And then we'd do that with Alberta and Manitoba. Only we'd be going for 4 or 5 days, or, you know, the better part of a week, and you get a lot done. And then you just get stuff, you know, on the road between here and there type of thing. If you're going to end up in the Red River Valley, well, you'd find somebody at Moosomin to visit with on the way over, or at Verdun or whatever. And it really made it economically feasible to see a lot of people in areas that may have never got visited by anybody in our
How,
type of medium.
how long would a shoot take? Like if you were
Well,
pulling onto a farm at 1 o'clock, how long were you there for?
we wouldn't be there terribly long. Like it all depend on the subject and what we were doing, but 2, 3 hours and we'd be done. We got pretty fast at it. And again, we were shooting mostly in the summer, so we had pretty long days. You'd have decent light till 7, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock sometimes at night, and you could start really early in the morning too. So that helped us a lot in terms of doing a lot of our work and basically the May through September timeframe as much as we could. Yeah.
And then how many shows were you doing a year?
Well,
And
we were doing, anywhere from, 17 to 22. Some years we do 21. It fluctuated a fair bit depending on, you know, uh, just a number of things. It could be, environmental conditions or weather conditions or it just depends what you're doing. Some years we did some things where we did a lot of traveling, like going down to the Case and John Deere combine plants and stuff like that. So that would eat up several days, but you could devote a whole show to the building of a combine and stuff like that. So it kind of worked out
so
kind of good that way.
what I was telling you a story before we came on that I was talking with a seed buyer in South Dakota who absolutely knew who you were and said the same thing I said. That was my absolute favorite show growing up. He was a farm kid as well, but the Prairie Farm Report is much more widespread, I guess, than I understood. So I think maybe talk a little bit about, I mean, the viewing area, because I think it's a lot bigger than I think anyone on here understands, but
Yeah.
also like the popularity of it. Maybe just talk about the viewership, the geography of the viewership, and then I do want to kind of talk about the popularity of the show in the mid '90s or
Sure.
but yeah, talk about where it was being viewed in its heyday.
Well, we were available all across the prairies on conventional TV in those days. When I say that, you know, uh, if you had Farm Vision or Farmer Vision, and you had the aerial with 2 channels or maybe 3, you could probably watch us. But of course, they were being carried on cable in the cities and urban markets as well. And so we our objective and was to blanket Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta, and the Peace River area of BC, which we did through Dawson Creek, and then I was in the '90s. We launched sort of well, it wasn't sort of, it was a U.S. version of the PFR that was seen in Montana, North Dakota, sort of western Minnesota, and a little bit of northern South Dakota. Basically, the same type of growing zone that southern Saskatchewan or Manitoba might have, mostly small grains, not a lot of corn or beans. And so the farming was very similar, the equipment was very similar. And so we did that for a number of years, uh, traveling in those states, interviewing farmers with a lot of the same. They'd have a fancy shop or whatever that just had everything. And gosh, we'd run that in Canada too, because guys up here get some ideas out of it, and vice versa. We'd run Canadian stuff in the US. And so that carried on for quite a few years. And that gave us a good market down there. And then as I guess as satellite television came along in Canada, which was basically early 2000s, I guess, late '90s, um, with Shaw Direct and Bell and all those folks. Of course, all these prairie stations, didn't matter if it was Edmonton or Regina or Winnipeg or wherever, they're all carried on satellite. So immediately you're seen from coast to coast to coast in Canada. And so then we get all kinds of feedback from Ontario, Quebec, the Maritimes, Yukon, you name it. And so it became a national weekend show, if you will, because we generally ran on Saturdays or Sunday, mostly Sundays. And so that was, I guess, the height of our show in terms of reach in those days. And
Prairie Farm Report was the biggest reason why people were late to church in Clearwater on Sundays. because it showed at 10:30 on CKX in Brandon. Are you kidding me? We're gonna miss the last 10 minutes of the show. That's when the best one's on. The only good thing about it is my dad was also fighting my mom on it, not just me.
Yeah, I think we heard about some of those stories in some other markets. There'd be some markets that would run us, yeah, at 11 o'clock Sunday, which, yeah. Oh,
Terrible.
that was that was tough in some areas of Western Canada. But then
So, well,
then the VCR did come along, and so once they figured out how to run it,
yeah,
they could record it.
for sure. Well, so Bill, I don't know even if this data exists or it's possible to like know it, but I'm so curious. I said to a few people, I'm so curious to know, was PFR just the biggest thing in my life, so I mistakenly think that other people find it popular? Or was it actually kind of like were there rural people that weren't necessarily completely on farm, like made their living off farm or on farm? But what was the viewership like? Is there data on like how many people were watching? I assume there must be if you're selling advertising, but how was that calculated in the 80s and 90s?
Well, back in those days, yeah, it was, we would get occasionally access to the ratings that the TV stations subscribe to, but again, that's a fairly costly thing to acquire as a small independent company to, get access to those ratings. And so they'd often share it with me, but not always. And sometimes it was a little hard to interpret. But our sponsor, we'd cooperate with our sponsor, and quite often we do fairly broad. It'd sometimes be part of an omnibus survey or to be a survey that they just do specifically on TV viewing habits. They would do a good job. It would be a very scientific survey, telephone survey directly to farmers, to a list of bona fide producers, if you will. And we'd often be in that close, just under 80%. They, I guess the question was, what show did you watch regularly? And I think regularly meant once every 2 or 3 weeks or something as such. And we'd always be in the 78, 80% area with that group of 1,300 producers or whatever the number was that was
Like
being surveyed in Western Canada.
that must have been you guys, the National and Seinfeld, that had numbers that high.
Yeah. Well, again, it was just one TV show in 1/2 hour period
Yeah,
of a 24-hour broadcast day. So
but also there just wasn't that many shows. Like there,
no, not agriculturally, and ironically, not ironically, but we'd always be, in terms of the television thing, and quite often there'd be technical questions asked about the show. Did you find something valuable in that show that you could, say, use in your farming operation and things like that? And we'd always score higher than any other show, whether it was up against Country Canada or any other show that happened to be on. There was some great regional shows like you know uh, here in Saskatchewan. There was CTV always did a regional 1/2 hour and stuff like that. So and quite often we'd be bookended with those shows, which generated even a bigger audience because you'd have a 1 hour block instead of a 1/2 hour block, and so that helped as well. And so, but yeah, they that was sort of our best barometer that we would have, and I think it satisfied everybody to show that we were on the right track in terms of getting a good solid agricultural interest audience.
so I guess two questions here. How do you I guess because the revenue model is you get advertising, right? So how without, I guess if they keep coming back and are demanding more and more, it's a pretty good barometer as far as is the advertising successful? But like, how do you, like, how over the years did you kind of set that rate without, if the satellite companies weren't coming up with data for you? And you brought up something interesting I think is important to address in any business. Was there at any point any competitors that came in and tried to do something similar?
Well, yeah, there was other programs available, and again, I wouldn't really call it there wasn't too many. There's the odd one would come in, but there wasn't really competitors as such. I wouldn't think. They were more, in some cases, maybe even complementary in some ways, because again, a lot of the programming that say CTV would do or another programmer might do, they they always got fairly hung up on ag policy and the politics of farming and ranching. And don't get me wrong, that's an area that needs to be served and should be served and seriously served. And it's a very costly thing to cover that kind of or cover that type of issue. And so um, again, it's a different sort of bucket of barley, if you will, in terms of the type of audience or the interest in that audience. I mean, I suppose every farmer should be interested in how, you know, uh, a subsidy program works for a certain grain or whatever, or insurance schemes work for grains and oilseeds. They really should be interested in it. They should know how it works. But, do they want to sit and watch that for 15 minutes on TV? I don't know. And somebody talk about, the aspects of it. I think that they're more interested in seeing how to build things. And we did what we tried to do our best. Back in those days, they had a term in television that was called talking heads. And we try even to this day to avoid programming that has a lot of talking heads, because we're doing that, of course, but that's us. We're not real TV, I guess. But you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that you illustrate it with cover or B-roll, as the industry calls it, of you want to see that thing working in the field, or you want to see how it's built, and you want to see how that yard is designed. You want to see the visual or that shop is built. And so that's far more interesting to somebody, because there's that detail in it, if you will. And that's why our shows run over and over again currently on our rural channel. And people don't, some people get sick of it. I'm sure if they've seen it a lot of times, but
I don't think so.
some people get a different thing out of it each time they see it. It's
Yeah.
surprising. You sometimes miss it, or if you saw it 2 years ago and then all of a sudden you saw it again, and you found something different. And so, yeah. Whereas, again, talking head news programming, you don't get that. And plus, it's very stale. It's dated. It's what it is on this day, but 2 weeks from now it can change.
So, Bill, what would you say? I know this is tough because there's probably not a great metric for it, but like, what would have been peak popularity, I guess, from I don't know whether that would be revenue dollars or if you can estimate viewership. But like, what year would have been like peak Prairie Farm Report audience? And I guess maybe talk about like kind of the phase out, just like the last shows you did, and what year that kind of all took place.
Well, I would say that the peak conventional viewership, when I say conventional, I mean watching us on regular television in terms of either farmer vision with that farm aerial out on the farm, or on cable in town, would be through the 90s, the late 90s and into the early 2000s. But then in terms of overall numbers, I think our audience got even larger when, again, in those days it was called Star Choice, and I think Bell Express View is what it was called when it first came out. When those guys started running the prairie stations that were accessible all across the country, we suddenly got eyeballs from BC to the East Coast. And so I think that, overall numbers would probably been higher during those years, but we weren't really surveying, and then you really couldn't, because you'd be surveying in big cities, which and don't get me wrong, a lot of city people, whether in Vancouver and Toronto, do or did watch us a lot, and some still do, and through our rural channel. And so there is people do like to see how their food is made and where it comes from, believe it or not, and I think that's good.
What about like VHS DVD sales? Like what year would those have been?
Well, VHS, it was always a big, this time of year, if we were doing this, if there was a webinar type thing 20 years ago, I wouldn't be able to do this. I
Yeah,
wouldn't, I'd be too busy
packing
helping
boxes.
Helen and a few other students stuff mailbags with VHS tapes because everybody wanted to buy, 5 or 10 or 20 tapes for Christmas to give to somebody.
And then how was that managed? Like, did you just have a huge library and you went and plucked
Well,
one?
we started out duplicating with just, 3 or 4. You get these triple deck duplicators for VHS tape, and I think we got up to about a set of 9 of them that we could run at once, that we could record the 1 hour VHS video. Of course, in real time, it took an hour to record it, but at
Yeah.
least you get 9 done instead of 1. So yeah, and then oh man, the miracle of DVD came along, and that just totally you first of all you condensed your shipping down to next to nothing compared to a VHS tape. Quality was like 10 times better, I'd say, and you could burn DVDs. You could burn an hour DVD in 5 minutes, so or maybe 7 or 8 minutes, and
Yeah, so you could just make it to order
yeah. Well,
right then.
we then were able to get towers that you could do, 15 or 20 DVDs at the same time. So we did that all in house. A lot of people would farm that out, but we were able to do it in house, and it allowed us to control inventory pretty tightly. You wouldn't have a bunch of surplus DVDs laying around if it didn't happen to sell. So uh, that was a nice innovation, and I guess that all came along in the early 2000s, and eventually, yeah, that's sort of
And weirdly, it didn't last that long, did it?
no, yeah, like DVDs are not very common anymore. No, no, but
No, like well, we're gonna talk about where we can get the DVDs at the end,
yeah,
but I'm gonna buy one for a couple for my dad for I know it won't be out by the holidays. Don't worry, I don't need it by then. But I want to get some for my dad, and I'm gonna have to. You're gonna make me. I'm gonna have to go buy a DVD player, which is
yeah.
okay. I probably should have one anyway. But yeah, it's crazy how fast DVDs went from popular to not.
I know it was about, oh gosh, probably about 10 years ago now. Uh, we we had some DVD. There was couple some DVD players for sale somewhere. It was Best Buy or what. So we went out and we bought a couple. I don't think we've taken them out of the box, but we knew we should buy them because we figured that someday you
Yeah,
might want to play something.
if you want to sell one, let me know. I drive through
And
that all the
you
time.
can't put it in a computer anymore. You can't do anything. So
No,
so
I
it,
can't, I literally can't even do that.
yeah, I know it's really and that's just the way everything went. That's for sure.
So, Bill, I
We
got
are
one
online. We
question.
are online with on YouTube and stuff. We're not totally up to date there, but we do have a pretty good batch of not DVDs, videos that you can watch, segments, if you will, on our YouTube channel.
I did. I went back and watched quite a few preparing for this.
Yeah,
Uh,
we haven't got the really old stuff from the 80s and 90s on there yet, but our goal is to get that up there one day.
Perfect. Well, I will look forward to that day. I promise you.
Yeah. In the meantime, you can go to farmvideos.com if you actually want to buy DVDs.
Oh, perfect. I don't have to do it on here. Well, Bill, I got one more question, and like if you think I've missed anything, but just before we get into, so I should let the people on tonight know what I asked from Bill and Helen was to, if they had time, just go through some of the old PFRs and just talk about some of their favorite inventions so
Mhm.
Bill picked out 4 that we're gonna chat about, but
Sure.
maybe because I being an entrepreneur is a weird drug almost. Your life's crazy and you're busy and you swear you hate it, but like your brain can't shut off, and it's just but there must have been an invention or inventions that you can think of where you went out and you thought that is an unbelievable idea and that is going to, change agriculture or be, something big someday.
Yeah.
And not saying that you were investing in some of these projects, but is there something out there that like you saw early on and we're like, that's going to make it for sure?
Well, yeah, there was actually, and two of them actually did, and they're fairly closely related. As you know, in the late '80s, early '90s, there was a real movement towards direct seeding in Western Canada, and it was really being driven here in Saskatchewan, where there was issues with wind erosion, water erosion, but mostly wind erosion, retention of moisture. But the issue was conventional seeding equipment just wasn't cutting it in terms of getting through that stubble in the subsequent year. And so one of our first people we interviewed was an inventor, and he was just basically a farmer at the time. Was Jim Halford out at Indian Head, and he developed a opener and for a seeder that was amazingly good at getting through the trash and getting seed placed properly. And in just a few miles, not terribly far from Langbank, Saskatchewan, and roughly around the same time, maybe a few years later, we bumped into the Beaujeu brothers, Pat and Norbert, and they were involved with the early days of openers that again could deal with the high trash situation. And in the case of Norbert's opener, it also was placing fertilizer in a way that it was really being utilized by the seed more efficiently than ever before and not damaging the seed. And so though those I could tell right at the time that these guys they were onto something that because again this no-till or minimum till or direct seeding movement seemed to be it seemed to be appealing to a lot of producers in terms of giving them a chance to keep the stubble up, catch some snow, and get a relatively good continuous crop situation going on their farm. And seed spacing maybe wider, row spacing wider than they've ever done it before, up to a foot wide, and all those sorts of things. Seeding in between the rows. So in the case of both those companies, Jim Halford's invention went on to be, I think, purchased by John Deere, and I think that technology is still used to this day on the John Deere air seeders. And Norbert and his family went on to establish Seedmaster, which is one of the biggest and largest manufacturers of seeding equipment in Western Canada. Their plant's just a half mile from where I sit right now here in east of Regina. And so those two individuals, they really, those were two inventions that I just knew there was something good going to happen there. Now there was others that we did that I thought were just as good, but you know, they never were able to sort of get it going. And there's more to an invention than just the invention. There's the protecting the patent and the whole
Marketing.
manufacturing process, which
Yeah, yeah,
a lot of guys that build
absolutely.
stuff in their shop aren't prepared to deal with. And so you got to have a big wide array of skills to pull it all together. But there's some small ones that were good. We did the power pin, which was a self-hitching system that was developed by a farmer out by Tompkins, Saskatchewan. It became very popular. And then there's other things that boy, there's just too numerous to mention. There's other items out there that were popular with that became quite well known. And but I'd say those would be the best known. They're probably the best in single invention I think I could say I saw or was we recorded was a machine called the Fence Maker, which was developed by a fellow by the name of Lloyd Quantz out of Sundre or Olds, Alberta. And it's an absolutely amazing machine for building a fence. They can build a 350 meters of fence in a day, 4-wire, 5-wire, and done. One person can do that. I don't know if you've seen it. It's
This is a phenomenon that's coming back. I saw this on TikTok, but it was like an old video. I was sure it was a PFR video, but yeah, I saw this like just the other day.
yeah. Well, this machine, I think he still operates. He operates under the name, I think, Green Edge Technology out of, I think, Olds, and it was a machine that would drill 4 holes or 5 holes if you're doing 5 wire, and the wire would go right through, and it would clamp on. It was on a skid steer, and you'd go. I think they were spacing the posts 22 feet apart, 8 foot posts that vibrated in 4 feet into the ground, so it wasn't going anywhere. And so all that was being done with one operator.
Yeah.
And so that that I think they have made a few of those, but I thought it would maybe get a little more popular than it has. But again, you got to be into the electric fence thing, which is not always everybody's cup of tea in terms of grazing. And
Well, I'll
so
disagree with that.
yeah, well, yeah, I mean it's nice for, well, certainly rotational grazing, but this wouldn't be for rotational. This would be for your
Perimeter.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, now that we're talking about inventions, we might as well. I don't want to take up your entire evening, and I worry if there could be a few tangents here. Again, if anyone has any questions, Bill picked these out based on kind of I just asked him. I said, can you go through a few videos and if you see something you like and can remember a story from it. So yeah, tell us about it, Bill. I know we kind of went through it before. I've
Sure.
scratched down a few questions, but what's going on here?
Well, we shot this, I think it was 2002, and it was I can't remember if it was the spring or fall. Looks like there was some snow on the ground there, but it wasn't too cold yet. This was a fellow by the name of Andy Schupbach at Claresholm, Alberta. He'd taken I think it's a GM truck there, and he had got his hands on, I think it was a Brandt bale processor. And but the neat thing he did is he put the fork on the back and the one on the front, and so he could head to the feed yard with 3 bales. Of course, there'd be one loaded right into the spreader itself, and we thought that was pretty neat. And he, as you can see, the front bale flipped up over the cab and dropped it in, and then no,
That's
it didn't drop. No, pardon me, he dropped it on the ground, and he would pick it up with
and then went back and picked it
yeah,
up.
with the back one. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, he didn't flip it up over the cab, and so yeah, that was a pretty nifty idea, we thought.
Oh, 100%. So something like this, Bills, you said this is like 2001 or 2002.
Yeah, it was 02 even.
Were you still hitting the road, or did you had a team behind you at this point?
Well, I did have people that would help me on the road with doing the journalism side of it, but this particular one, no, this was, in fact, I think my oldest son was the shooter on this one, or shot part of it later in the summer. I think we revisited him. This footage may have been shot by one of my other guys, but and yeah, I actually ended up doing an interview with him on this because we did, again, this would quite often happen. We got going with him on this particular innovation, and then he had a heck of a dandy cattle handling facility in his yard that we didn't even know about. And so we did a whole section on it later in the year. So that's quite often what happened with a lot of our visits. One thing
Yeah,
leads to another.
they've got more than one invention.
Yeah, if they're inventors, they've usually built more than one thing.
Geez, I gotta think. There's a guy from our area who's literally famous because he was on the PFR 3 times. He had a backwards tractor with a front end loader, and
Right.
he made a sprayer from scratch. And Pete Harris is the guy's name.
Oh, I know that name. Yeah, I've heard that
Yeah.
name.
He made 4 or 5 backwards tractors. It looked like a tractor, but with a loader on the back end.
Yeah.
And we called them Peterbilts.
Yeah.
There's still a few kicking around, but
Yeah.
you guys spent some time in his yard, which deservedly so.
Yeah.
Anything that he came up with was better than anyone else in the area.
Oh yeah, he was a character.
So yeah, talk about what's going on. So we kind of just made a theme here and joined together, but yeah, we got some hay processing equipment here.
Yeah, on I guess it would be your left side there. Fellow by the name of his name was Dale Lasco up at St. Bruce, Saskatchewan, a real character. He just loved to get his torch out and do all kinds of work. And here he converted I think it might have been a 510, but I'm not sure. It might have been a 410, but whatever. It was a Massey combine, and he kept the cab on it, as you can see there, and everything. So it was pretty nice and cozy and air conditioned and everything. And had a round baler stuck on the back of it, and I'm not sure what make of baler that was. Same color, I think. It might have been a Massey, I'm not sure. But anyway, it worked really well. He actually went on and built another two round baling systems, and he did a lot of straw baling. And he was frustrated with the conventional straw round bale, saying that there wasn't enough stuff in it, which, you know, is a good argument. It's usually pretty light stuff. It's not like hay. And so he built two 8-foot wide round balers that we did subsequently a few years later. I think we did this.
I've seen the episode.
Yeah, I think we
Yeah.
did this one back in '94, and then he went on and he built a pull type 8-foot, and then he built an SP 8-foot one. It didn't have a cab and stuff on it, but he could at least roll up an 8-foot wide round bale.
Can you remember the combine he disassembled for the self-propelled
For this one,
for the 8-foot one?
no, I'm not sure what it was. It could have been. I don't know which. You know what? I'm starting to think it was. I got to look at. I should look at the script guy. He may have used might have used a swather
Oh, okay.
for that one, because that's maybe why it didn't have a cab and stuff, like an SP swather. But yeah, he was quite the character.
Something tells me you've met a few characters.
Yeah, yeah. And the invention on the right here, it's kind of different. Actually, it was built by Jim Toes and his son, I believe, Frank, or it was the other way around. I can't remember. One was Frank, but the Toe at Wascatino, Alberta, up in northern Alberta, and I think he was actually the Heston dealer in a nearby town there. I'm not sure which one. Might have been Westlock or something. Anyway, so he had access to Heston big square balers, and he had hayland, and he wanted to some way he was selling a lot of small squares into the equine market into the southern US, which can be pretty lucrative. And but what was always is a hassle is manpower and equipment to get the square bales out of the field in a timely fashion. And so he took this Heston and tore the guts out of it, I guess, and put a put it still kept a plunger in there, but it was to push back. I think he put in 12, 3-foot small square bales, and built a big square 12-foot bale that was all tied up and fairly, it wasn't as tight as a big square bale would be, but tight enough that you could put it on a loader and get it into a semi. And so that's how they were shipping hay at that particular time. That was in 2007 to, they were selling hay into the Florida market, I think for $180 a ton, whereas the local market was probably, $50 or $60. I don't know. So it was quite a premium it made it very viable to ship halfway across the continent, or all the way across the continent, just about.
Bill, I got a kind of a fun question, and you don't have to say any names, but
Yeah.
some of these inventions, like these are true old farm boys, and they're not engineers and they're not mechanics, but I mean, amazing because they got the confidence to actually do it. But there must have been a few times where you were out videoing an invention that wouldn't cooperate, wouldn't work, or broke down, or something went awry.
Yeah, yeah, it would happen occasionally, but it was unbelievable how reliable these things were. And we'd talk at length. I'd have folks here that would talk to them on the phone quite a bit in advance, and you are using this and it is working. And he said, "Oh yeah, it's but yeah, I mean things can break down, as you know, with any farm equipment, but they were pretty well proven, that they were working. And in the case of both these chutes, uh, they were actually the one with the Heston conversion. They had a double small square Heston assembly for pulling two small squares at once and
Yes,
making.
I think that was we had the picture, a picture of it for the intro. A
Yeah,
big
yeah, they're actually
for a bit.
this very week on the rural channel that show is running. I just saw it the other day, and so they could really crank things out fast. Which, if you want good quality horse hay, you can't mess around with any rain or high moisture.
Definitely.
So they had the formula there, but I'm not sure where it went. Like whether they, because I think he had plans of patenting it, and maybe did in fact, and commercializing it, but I don't know if it ever got off the ground.
You know, I'm just thinking of planning around this, like uh to put up hay, like to show haying equipment working. I mean, it has to be a very specific time of year, and then the weather has to cooperate. In a lot of these places you're flying into, that must have been a nightmare.
Well, yeah, in the early years, that was one of the reasons we, even though it was nice to be able to fly in it, but you had to rent vehicles and stuff, and so that was one of the reasons we went to rubber tiring it ourselves, is it gave you a little bit of flexibility, and we would plan some flexibility, and it did happen, where say if it was a hay shoot and the guy got a big thunderstorm and got rained out and couldn't go till the next day, we quite often could flip that guest around with the one that we were planning to do, you know, the other day. And so that did happen more than once. I can assure you of that. And
I
so
believe you.
again, when you're on the ground for 3 or 4 days in that area, it allowed you to do that, and we would. There's not too many that we got totally washed out on, but there was some that we had to, go back later.
Yeah. So what's going on here?
Oh, these guys were they're in the Tabor area. I believe his name was Frank Martins, and they had taken this. I think this loader came. I think they bought it out of Utah or somewhere. They were doing irrigation haying there, and so they get a couple cuts a year and big yields in the Tabor area. And they put this on well, I guess it'd be rated as a 5 ton. I think it was a Ford truck, and I think he could load, I think about a dozen at a time at extremely high speeds. He could just run all over the field, and he'd just bang into the big square bale and make it straight. Just hit, even if you hit it on an angle, you could just push it, and then it would get straight and locked into that big loader on the front. Flipper up over top of the cab, goes on the box, and then gets dragged back. There's you don't see it in this picture. There's big forks on the back of the truck, and of course, run as far as you want down the road, legal and everything, and build a stack, and a very good stack, because you could that table that bed would flip right up, and he could
They
back in and
pivoted like
squeeze it
this,
up.
like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
horse on the truck. Yeah.
yeah. You could squeeze it right in, and it was really slick for putting up hay fast, and that's what they wanted to do. And I'm not sure if it was export hay or not. It could have been. I don't. It might have been Timothy. I'm not sure. But again, timeliness on the harvest is a big deal there. And so we thought that was kind of neat.
You said something funny, which was you can even drive it down the road, safety and everything.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but I
Well,
don't think that was the case here.
no, no. This one didn't pass safety. Yeah, it didn't. This is a gentleman by the name of Don Selby from Vimy, Alberta. He was an active farmer. I think he was in his 70s when we paid him a visit. What year was that? That was back a ways. I think that wasn't terribly far back. I think it was in the mid '02s or '03, somewhere around there. He had built this. He had this old Datsun. Well, first of all, to give you the background of the story, he quit farming and he was on an acreage, but he had a few quarters of mostly hayland around his yard, and he was totally frustrated because the fields were just peppered with gophers in those particular years. And he said, I really want to clean them up because they were coming into his yard, because he had grass in his yard, but it was also dry, and because of course gophers grow better in dry weather. And so he he said to the area farmer, he said, look, I need water for my yard to, keep things green and growing. And he had a dugout near the yard. He says, if I can access your pond to pump water out, I'll clean the gophers off these 2 quarters. And sure enough, he did. And but it wasn't with a 22. It was with a old Datsun truck and a bunch of what I guess are known as rat traps is what he used. And they have a little flag on them that flips up when you've caught your in this case gopher. You just place it in the hole. And so they're harder to see, especially as this looked like this ground's just been hayed, but as the hay grows, it gets harder to see. And so he wanted to get a good vantage point, so he figured he could stand on a platform in the back of this truck, extend the steering wheel and the control. It happened to be an automatic, so no problem there. And away he went. He would go around the field and pick these. Where to stop to pick up his dead gophers for the day.
I have a hard time believing there's no 22 in that truck.
I don't see a rack in the back, but who knows? But anyway,
I can't believe that.
He ended up in the bush once with it, he told us, because he didn't have the brakes working. And it got going on the end of the field. I'm not sure how he worked the throttle. I think he actually worked it with his foot. But I think the lever on the right there, I think that's his brake. I think he then got brake control of it.
You had to modify, which is good. That seems safe.
Yeah.
I cannot believe that thing didn't pass safety.
Well, yeah, and I don't know if there was a kill switch on it if he fell off. I'm not sure.
There's a few things. I'm not a safety person by any stretch. I kind of want to own that truck, but it would be buyer beware, I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't know whatever happened to it, but anyway, he was a character, and he seemed to have fun building it, and I think had more fun cleaning up the gopher problem.
I mean, that is a fun problem to clean up. I'll give him that.
Yeah, especially on hayland, it's a real pain.
Oh yeah,
they make it rough, and they're not nice in grainland either. They can cut your yield a bit.
So, Bill, I want to give you a chance. I want to have one final question with you, but like I say, I told you we'd be about an hour and 15 minutes, and I know we've gone over, but maybe for the people that are on, I know obviously this is going to be recorded and posted on YouTube. Just talk about where you can access the Prairie Farm Report, both like the streaming and some of the cable options, and of course where to get DVDs. And then I just want to have a one last follow-up question with you, just on kind of the state of agriculture and your perspective about what's going on.
Right. Well, yeah, as you can see on the screen there now, farmvideos.com is a place to go if you want to. We still do have DVDs of all of our, dozens of titles. I think we got a total of 16 1-hour inventions videos alone, and 7 or 8 shops and videos, and they're all 1 hour long. So we got lots of videos there, and you might even be able to get them for Christmas yet if you want to pay a little extra for shipping.
Boy.
And the phone number's there. Although I see.
We're missing an 8.
Yeah, I think we're missing an 8, but I'll let you know it's another 8.
It's one more 8.
Yeah, it's 1-800-667-8888 is the toll free. And yeah, feel free to give us a call if you want some DVDs. And we actually have some merch too.
Oh yeah, right.
I don't know if we got any more of these mugs left, but we did have Prairie Farm Report mugs. But we do have some of these things too, these wonderful hats. So
nice.
So keep that in mind if you're interested. And yeah, and the online. Well, first of all, we do run PFRs continually, going back a number of years on the Rural Channel, which is the national specialty channel that's we got a CRTC license, and we're available from coast to coast to coast in Canada on Shaw Direct satellite. You can subscribe to us as one channel, or you can get us in a package. And and we're available on a number of cable operations and companies such as TELUS in Alberta and BC, and a number of cable distributors like Eastlink and Access here in Saskatchewan. So, and if you want to learn more about the Rural Channel, we also stream daily, or a live stream of the channel. You can get it off theruralchannel.com if you want to stream us any time of the day on a portable. You can stream it on anything from a phone to a laptop to a PC, and yeah, and I guess
YouTube, of
we do have
course.
the YouTube channel as well.
Yes.
Yeah, on Prairie Farm Report on the YouTube. We'll get
And
you.
yeah, I think there's over 100 episodes on there now. Would that be?
Yeah, there's I don't know if there's so much full episodes, but there's certainly segments of 7 or 8
Segments,
minutes
yeah,
on
yeah.
a topic. And one of them even went viral on us. Goodness me.
How'd you do
The
that?
one that went viral is I think it's over 7 million views.
No way. Which episode's that?
It's the one we did with Jerry's his first name. His last name's escaping me, but he's famous. A lot more famous than me. he's yeah, he built a large scale pool that is really nice on his farm. Oh boy, what community? It's sort of central Alberta, and it is it's he's got a liner in it, so it's nice and clean. He put some chlorine in it, so it's clear of algae and stuff. And he's got landscape nice on one side and nice sitting area. And yeah, that just caught everybody's imagination online, I guess, because a few bloggers and stuff picked it up. And the next thing you know, that was being viewed by people all over the place.
Well, you got to get the rest of think how much more viral content you have.
Yeah, well, there's some up there that have a couple 100,000 views, but we've been kind of slow on getting more of those up lately. But we'll have to get working at that. It's quite a project especially the older series, because of the formats they're in and everything. You got to do a lot of converting and upgrading
Right.
to get it sort of cleaned up, if you will, with the high definition television of today, or viewing that you get online, which is
Yeah. Yeah, our eyes are pretty used to this amount of pixelation.
Yeah, that's right. And so it takes quite a bit that way, but in any case, yeah, so there's lots of options there for people who want to watch. And I should tell you that the Rural Channel carries more than just vintage PFR stuff. We carry a lot of programming out of both Canada and the US in terms of colleges that produce programming like Oklahoma State and people like that. We carry Ag Week out of North Dakota, and we carry a lot of those programs that are of interest to there's a lot of programs of interest to Canadian farmers as well as ones around the world. And we also carry about a good portion of our programming, almost half, is related to equine, both entertainment and practical advice from various clinicians and stuff on working with horses, whether it's English or Western. And there's lots of features with fairly high-end dressage and other English disciplines, especially out of the European market. So there's a lot of variety there too, that you can sit in and enjoy yourself.
Well, sounds awesome. I got one final question, Bill, and you can take as much time as you want. I know we're kind of going over, but you get all the creative editorial freedom on this question. And I kind of prefaced it when we were chatting earlier, but you've had some time to think about it now. What would be the biggest change since you've entered the ag industry to today? You've talked to farmers firsthand. What would be the biggest change you've seen in the ag industry from your perspective in your time in agriculture, which I guess has been close to 50 years?
Yeah. In terms of well, obviously scale is a big thing. I mean, especially on the grain and oilseed side. You know, what 3 or 4 thousand acres at one time was a pretty big farmer, and now it's not really, almost hardly viable for one family. And so you see a lot of these 30, 40,000 acre operations, which is really hard to get your head around, but it seems to be fairly prominent. But there still is, I think, a fairly significant number of smaller farms that put more value into their operations on a per acre basis that allows them to support a family or two. So there's still those out there, and they quite often revolve around livestock, which isn't a bad thing. There's a lot of land in Western Canada that's better suited for cattle and things like that than sowing canola or wheat. And so I think that, you know, I think that that sector will continue and in fact grow. I think there's especially if they can maybe grow products that can be sold locally. There's people in the large urban centers, especially in Alberta and Winnipeg and Saskatoon and things like that. They're really looking for that. You know, they want to see where their food comes from and how it's made. And so I think some producers that are close to those areas are capitalizing on that. But yeah, as far as the change, I think communication is probably one of the biggest things, but I guess communications in a general sense, both in terms of the communications that's used to run your tractor or combine through the computers and things and microprocessors, and the communications just what we're doing here today or what you do on this thing every day. You know, you know this this would be the size of half this desk in 1990, and
Yeah,
so
maybe more.
they were, yeah. I mean, we had a bag phone. It was a great phone. I mean, it had better reach than even these things.
Yeah, no kidding.
But we were probably getting radiated as we were talking on it too. That's it ran at such high wattage. It probably never get approved today. But anyway, it worked great for you just have to find a hill somewhere and you could fly that signal 40 or 50K. But yeah, anyway, but I'm just saying is that was unheard of, and as was the internet, and so people have so much opportunity in terms of whether it's marketing grain or selling livestock that they never had. I don't think 40 or 50 years ago, not like they have today.
Well, Bill, I told you one last question, but as most of my kind of interviews go, it's like one tangent leads to a segue question. So I promise this is the last question. What was the last year, like the last episode Prairie Farm Report was made? And then more of the tangent I kind of want you to go down. What do you think the show would look like today? Like if you wanted to fire back up production in 2023, what do you think the concept of the show is still sound and it would be inventions heavy, or have you had time to think and see new opportunity or demand of a new idea or direction that Prairie Farm Report could go?
Well, our last show season was 2016, I guess it was 2015, 16. And so in terms of new episodes. And I think that, yeah, today, I think there's still a lot of innovation out there. It would be obviously a lot more costly to gather than it was back then in terms of some things would be less in cost in terms of your technology. In some ways, cameras and editing has probably come down in cost significantly from the way it was in the 80s and 90s. But of course, your labor and your travel and all your expenses has skyrocketed. So it kind of balances out, I guess. And I guess there you just have to have the work ethic too to pull it off, because it is a tiring. It takes a lot of work to put these things together. And had I not had a partner like Helen in business with me, looking after all the heavy bookkeeping work and all that side of the operation, And in later years, my three sons and daughters, my three sons and daughter, who are all still involved with the company in terms of the rural channel, had I not had those people helping me in the latter years, it nothing. And I don't think it would work. To be quite honest, you got to have, the real. You got to understand how a lot of people that aren't directly from sort of the rural mindset, they just don't really, I think, get it quite often as to why, you know, I'll run into, sometimes I'll run into a grain farmer and he's, a successful, good farmer and everything. And he's, trying all the new crops and stuff and doing very well. And, he'll look at me and say, but, so and so is still, yeah, he's still feeding 80 cows every winter. I don't know why he bothers to do that. And, I mean, that's what that fellow decides to do because he maybe actually likes the cattle and he maybe actually wants to do something every day in the winter instead of, going to town to curl or sit in the coffee shop. He wants to feed his cows. And I don't think that's such a bad thing. It's good for you, probably better for you from a health standpoint. And so, I mean, and I mean, there's some cash there to be made, and it's low input agriculture. And I mean, at the end of the day, that can help out making his operation more viable. And so I think that there's those kinds of folks are still out there for sure. And I think in your business, you probably run into a lot of those people if you're
God love them.
in the
Yes.
livestock business, yeah, in the cattle business especially.
Oh,
Yeah.
95%. I mean, and I don't want to speak for the people on tonight. We get all shapes and sizes on the webinar, but yeah, from a business standpoint, basically that's who I talk to 95% of the time.
Yeah. Well,
God
I
love,
think
God
a
love the
lot of
cattle
guys,
producers.
I just read a tweet the other day where a guy said, well, ship the last cows, they're gone. And it won't be a split hoof on this farm again, after, 50 or 60 years. And you could tell he was feeling kind of sad. And then people piped up commenting to him. He says, well, they're like family. They really
Yeah.
are, those cows.
It took me a lot of years to appreciate a cow, but I have to say I'm rather fond of them now. I go out time with them even when I don't have to.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's, I mean, that's something that some people don't understand in farming. And I mean, there's no doubt that it can be a drag, especially when it's minus 30 or 40 and howling wind and all the rest of it. It can be tough. But again, like grain farming, technology has helped a lot with the guys in the cattle business, whether it's, with feed handling and equipment and, they have heated shops to keep their tractors in and stuff. So it's not nearly as, a lot of guys can feed a lot of cows and do chores, if you will, an hour and a half a day and they're done, and the rest of the day they can go do something else.
Well, and there's been, I mean, I'm not there yet, but thinking the innovation that kind of came into the cattle industry after BSE when farms were absolutely forced to adapt or die. Yeah, I'm really proud, and the cattle producers that are left, I'm one of them. I mean, they really are a different breed because to go through the last 20 years of what that entailed, you had to be innovative, you had to be forward thinking because there was no profit left there was a little to no room for margin for error for sure. And yeah, I'm very blessed that this is the industry that I get to be in and the people that I get to interact with for sure.
Yeah, and like I say, they're a tough bunch. And I mean, look at this year, a lot of them, especially in Southwest Saskatchewan and Alberta, just cooked right out in terms of you know no hay, no pasture, no nothing. And so they've had to downsize in a lot of cases. And thankfully, this fall so far, right up until today anyway, I'm sure that the feed usage on a lot of those farms is probably about 50% of what it would have been on a normal year. So bring on the global warming this winter for feeding cows.
Yes.
Because I'll tell you, it's not good news though in terms of what
Definitely not good. Yeah, definitely not good news planetary standpoint or even
Yeah,
Mexican
yeah,
standpoint, but
yeah,
I have pissed and complained about the weather a lot and it hasn't seemed to do any good. So
yeah,
I'm just gonna relish when it actually does have a positive, favorable outcome for me.
yeah. Well, like the grain farmers say, they've never lost a crop in May yet, unless it was a frost or something. Usually, you know, with spring crops, that June, early July rains what makes it, and similarly with hay crops. I mean, and pastures, as long as we get some March snows in April and March and April or heavy rains, hopefully that'll recharge some of the drought areas to get them through another year.
100%.
Yeah,
Well, Bill, I want to be cognizant of your time and the people that are on. I can't tell you how much I appreciated the conversation and you agreeing to come on. I know I had lots of messages beforehand, people that were pretty bummed out that they couldn't be on. Obviously, we're going to post this up in YouTube, and we'll post in the links where to get DVDs and where you can find the PFR content. But anyway, Bill, I so greatly appreciate you taking time out of your day to spend with us, and hopefully it wasn't too painful of an interview. I know I really enjoyed kind of learning the history of the PFR and yours and Helen's history, and hopefully some of the audience did too. But I don't really care about those guys. I mean,
yeah.
it's nice to
Well,
come on, but
actually, in doing some research, I got into our database and I saw a name that was familiar to your name, a fellow we featured on our show.
who's that?
But I don't know if it's a relation or not.
There's
Craig
a few.
Craig Gardner.
That's my uncle. He's making. Oh,
There you go.
he was making buggy wheels, right?
Yeah, I think it was 19. I looked it up. I think it was 1994.
Oh, that's hilarious. I
Yeah,
completely forgot that he was on. But
yeah.
I'll tell you what, I got Christmas with him in a couple days, so I'll bring it up for
You
sure.
tell him. Yeah, yeah. So he's still around, is he?
Still literally making buggy wheels.
Oh
If
yeah, they were
PFR makes a
fantastic.
comeback, you can get him back on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, not only the buggy wheels, I think he had quite a collection of buggies, did he not? Or
Yes, he did. I think he's got less since he's moved off the farm, but
yeah, because
there
we
was a
were in
lot
a
of them.
Quonset, I think, on his farm, and it was just jam packed. He had some great. Oh man, he had some stuff from World War One. He had a it was an ambulance or not an ambulance. It was like a
Yeah, I know what you mean. An ambulance buggy though,
yeah.
essentially. Yeah.
It's what they used on the front lines in World War One in Europe to haul the injured back to
Yeah, to
a
hospital, to
MASH
barracks.
type operation. Yeah, and he had one of those, which is really rare.
Well,
And,
I will bring this up with him. I'm a little
okay,
embarrassed that he
yeah.
was on and he was my
Yeah,
uncle.
that was under the theme of again we got into this sort of through inventions. It was under the theme of craftspeople, farm craftspeople is the theme. Yeah,
Well, and woodworkers, I mean, there's lots of them out there and
yeah,
they've got some skill.
yeah. Well, he certainly had some skill with being a wheelwright because that takes some education to get that done right.
Well, you just won me some brownie points. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, Bill.
Okay, well that's great. Say hi to him.
Yeah, you betcha. But anyway, you have a great night and yeah, maybe we'll have you on again sometime. We'll hopefully PFR gets fired back up and we can
Well, yeah, well, we'll see what happens, but yeah, we appreciate your interest for sure, Joe.
Awesome. Well, have a great night and thanks everyone for coming on. Thanks again, Bill. Much appreciated.
Okay,
All right. Have a good night. We'll see you.
good.